Today we're tackling the Hidden Star block on our scrap block series. This really cute block comes together quickly and uses up 3 different colors of scraps. Some of these pieces are pretty small, so if you have a crumb collection you've been wanting to use up, this is a great opportunity to pull it out. To get started today, you're going to need the free downloadable PDF pattern, as well as scraps in the 3 colors that you've chosen. I'm going to be following along and using colors that kind of correspond to the diagrams to make it really easy to follow, but you can of course use any colors you'd like. The link to the pattern is in the description below this video, but you could always go to tinyorchardquilts.com. That's my website. You'll find all of my free patterns, my paid quilt patterns, as well as all of my edge-to-edge digital quilting designs. So once you download the pattern, you're going to see that it's broken down into a couple of sections. You have this large diagram of the block, you have the fabric requirements, and you have this diagram of the pattern. If you've never worked with fabric requirements or a diagram of a quilt block like this before, it's really easy to follow. So for A, you're going to cut 2 4 7/8 inch squares and cut them on the diagonal. And those correspond to these A's in the diagram. The same with the B. You're going to cut 4 squares this size and cut those in the diagonal. And those are all of your little B triangles in the pattern. If you've watched many of my videos, you know that I like having things a little oversized to trim them down, but you'll notice that these measurements are pretty exact, and that's because scraps come in all shapes and sizes, and I don't want you to not use a scrap because you don't think it's big enough, and then it turns out that it was because you were going to trim away anyway. So these are all exact measurements. If you want to take the trimming route, you can always refer back to some of my quilting math videos and upsize some of these. So for example, these AC half square triangle units, I have you cutting exact triangle shapes with 4 7/8 inch sides and then the long side, and then sewing those triangles together. If you wanted to upsize these to 5-inch triangles and then make 2 at a time half square triangles and then trim those half square triangles down to 4.5 inches, you absolutely can. I've given you these triangle measurements again, so you can use every little odd shaped scrap that you have. You are always welcome to modify these instructions and use your quilty brain to best make use of your scraps. I'm going to go ahead and follow these assembly instructions so that you can see the non-trimming as an option. I've already gone through my 5-inch square kind of scrap collection and pulled out these scraps to use, and now I need to cut them all down to size. I used my square ruler to trim my scraps here. I used it to get 2 nice clean edges, and then I could rotate the scraps around and line up those really perfectly newly cut edges with the lines on the ruler so that I knew I was getting a really accurate cut. And then I would just cut them in half to prep them for the triangles. And then I just continued that process, doing the different sizes with the square ruler all the way through all of the scraps. Don't be intimidated by those 7/8 of an inch measurements. It's just another line on your ruler. You can see I've lined mine up here for a 7/8 inch cut, and then I just trim around the edge of the ruler. Now that all of our cutting is done, we have 2 routes for assembly. We can either set ourselves up for chain piecing, or we can lay out all of the pieces in kind of this exploded view and just assemble it as it's shown. If you are going to set yourself up for chain piecing, what you're looking for is units that kind of share a similar construction. So we know that we have 4 of these AC half square triangles. So we could put all of our A and C together and just set them aside. So we know that all of those will be chain pieced together. And then we know that we have 4 of these side units. And we could go ahead and just lay out those side units. We know that we have 4 that are going to be just like this. Now, these fabrics, because they came from the same piece, are the same. If that happens to you and you want a different look, you could always just pick these piles up and swap one of them to the bottom. And then you'll have a better mix for more of a scrappy look. So that's the chain piecing setup option. I'm going to go ahead and lay out the whole block so that I can move fabrics around and make sure that all the fabrics are exactly where I want them to be. So I just start by following the diagram. Now, since I cut all of my fabrics from a pretty limited range of scraps, I do have a lot of repeats. This little tulip pink fuzzy ball thing shows up 3 times, as does these little eyes. If I was cutting for an entire quilt, then I would have a lot more pieces to kind of sub in and shuffle my fabrics a little bit. But I'm working with what I have, and I think the layout looks just fine. So I'm going to start sewing together. Now it's time to start assembling our units, and you can work in whatever arrangement feels best for you. I'm probably going to work in my little number pad 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 arrangement like I always do. But if you would prefer to group like all of the half square triangles together and get those all done and returned and then work on the little diamond and a square blocks, then that is totally up to you. But you're just going to take the elements for one unit, make the unit, and return it to the layout. And then once all of the units are made, we can assemble it like a 9-patch. So I just want to leave this little note about bias in scraps. My scraps, and I'm sure your scraps, are basically never on the grain of the fabric. And we've cut all of our squares, or most of them, into triangles. So we're introducing even more kind of bias edges. So just take care when you're working on scrap quilts, because they're just not as predictable as squares that are cut from like a width of fabric. So just be ginger and use some starch if you need to. One note about assembling these little economy blocks. I've sewn one side of my kind of diamond on already, and now I'm trying to align the second side. Now, you just want to center this triangle along the side, but remember that there's another 1/4 inch of this aqua piece hiding in the seam here. So you don't want to center it on the like visible section of the square. You want to center it from here, where the square really begins, all the way out to the edge. If you don't want to eyeball it, you can always take your pieces and just fold them together and give it a little pinch, and that'll create a little bit of a fold there. And then same thing, you need to make sure that you're folding it edge to edge of the block. Give it a little pinch. And then you can align those little divots together. And now you're ready to sew. Now that all of my units are finished, I'm going to sew them together into rows, and then I will sew the rows to each other to finish the block. I did take the time to trim off the little dog ears as I was finishing each unit. It's not absolutely required, but it will kind of reduce bulk at kind of some of these little intersections where there's several pieces of fabric coming together. If you kind of add dog ears to that, it can make it a little lumpy. So it's not a bad idea to trim them off. My block is all assembled and finished. I love this yellow star in the center. Now, the black and the aqua, because I chose some black fabrics that have a lot of aqua in them, don't have quite the punch as my other block. And that just goes to show how different this block can look depending on your scraps. Now, the bottom third of the pattern is a little bit of color inspiration. I know I don't have enough scraps to make a complete quilt out of like one color story of blocks. So I've shown you a couple of different options on what you can do and the different colors that you can combine to create a full quilt layout. The first layout option has our hidden star block alternated with another really simple block that brings in a 4th color. I've chosen white in this example, but it can be anything. And this block is just squares and a couple of half square triangles. So it would come together in a flash. And I think it makes a nice alternate block. It kind of looks like these blocks kind of connect in like a little lattice kind of look. Then I have another one where these stars, like that center star, is all the same, but the outer ring that I've done in pink and aqua here in these examples are all different colors. They share a white or low volume background, but again, you could use a solid fabric to kind of add a little bit of fabric to your scraps, or if you have a ton of low volume scraps like I do, you could use them all up in this layout. Another option is to use 2 shades of the same color in the block, one for the center star and one for the outer. Now you need to have a lot of scraps for this because you need to pick kind of the light tones of a color of scraps and some dark tones. If they're too similar, then that star isn't going to really show up. So this is great if you have kind of a mix of really dark and kind of pastel looking colors in your scrap bin. The last example on the page is I took those same 2 colored blocks but alternated it with kind of an Irish change lattice looking alternate block to create almost like a border around all of these star blocks. I hope you guys enjoyed making this hidden star block with me. I would love if you left me a comment and told me what color combination you would make your hidden star block out of. I will see you again very soon with another Quilty Fun video, and in the meantime, if you want to have some more scrappy fun, then there are some videos popping up on the screen right now for all of my scrap collection videos. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Happy quilting!